Right there.
Okay.
I'm stepping out. Have a great shoot.
Well, good afternoon, folks. How are you? And as you know, this is Bob Gums with the Concerned Forum, and we're going to have a very interesting show today. I have a good friend, Kim Westcott, and what we're going to do today, something interesting. We're just going to talk. We're going to talk about what's happening with the country, with our community, with working people in this country, and how we feel about it. And who knows? If we talk enough, maybe we might come up with some positive ideas. But first thing I'd like to do, I'd like for Kim to tell us what she's about and what she's into.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. It's wonderful to be here.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm a good person for summarizing myself, but I'll do my best.
Okay.
So I'm born and raised in New York City, and I have family that have always been socially active. And mostly, even though it's been a long path, I've acquired some tools going on to different roles and different kinds of work, mostly organizing and then doing social work and then working in the law and then also doing some teaching to be in the position to do work on some issues that I think is important. And mostly what I try to focus on are the exclusions that come from white supremacy and racism and the way it's manifested in the punishment system and the way that the formerly incarcerated are fully excluded from the community and the way that overlaps with racism. And also the need to really look at economic development not just as a side issue, but as basically the corollary to what it is when you've got forces that are trying to create barriers, and then there's the need to create resources for the people where you'd hope that they live. And I know that sounds abstract, but
No.
But, you know, an example would be when you think about the laws for what people are trying to deal with to expand the space for the formerly incarcerated, you know, we want expungement, for example. We want to make sure that people don't carry their convictions with them for their whole lives, so that when you're applying for a job or for housing or for anything that people need to live, that you don't have to have this stigma, you know, that is about saying that you've been through the punishment system. There are a lot of other things that people need, all kinds of things, because you don't get them even before you encounter the punishment system, that need to be addressed. Reentry is just a whole area, and it really intersects with the human rights needs. You know, what do people need to live? And it just so happens that a lot of the things that people aren't getting, you know, either the police state will sweep you in, and then they remove you, and then you've got double exclusions in terms of lack of continued growth or education in the institutions, you know, real connections for the job training, and it just, you lose separation with your family. It's a really horrible. Punishment is not a natural system in the way that people think that maybe prison just sprung out of the Judeo-Christian system. It didn't. Our prison system has been around for 220 some years in this country. And it's an institution that we created. And what I love so much about Angela Davis when she talks about our prisons obsolete is she puts out the point for people to think, which is, this is an institution that we created. What do we want? And does it serve us? And it doesn't have to be like this. And then you've got other examples out there, you know, not that they are ready-made for us, but there are other countries in the world where you don't have a punitive punishment system in quite this way. They don't have the histories of racism and the kind of post-enslavement that we have, but there are different examples. So this system does not have to be this way. at all, for all the economic reasons that it exists and everything else. The other side of the equation, very briefly, is just if you want the community to have resources to live, and you know that there's gentrification and planned shrinkage and people being moved out of the city, mostly communities of color, deed theft, all of these things, how do you make sure that these communities still have property and still have resources in which to live? And I truly think that community land trust, solidarity, economic principles, cooperative, communal, it's very, very important, and it allows for a more self-determined community economic development process where the community, in whatever ways that they do it, in their advisory boards or their, there are lots of different citizens councils, different ways to express your idea of what your community needs, and to create an economy around having that, so that it's the community itself that can incubate their own worker co-ops, can have land held in there for at least some period of time.
How do they do that?
How do they do it?
Yeah.
It's a really good question. What piece of that are you wanting to hear about?
All right, like for example, I asked this because I'm a member of CASA, and that's one of the things that we're into. Fairness for low-income people. Please don't knock down the little piddly-ass community I live in and then build it up and bring in a whole bunch of, super yuppies, and I can't afford to live there.
That's right.
So what happens?
That's a tough one because there's so many forces. What I would hope for people to think about, for organizations that can educate people about these tools being available, so that when you think about an organization like the Democratic Socialists, or where they say this is a platform for the things we want.
Excuse me.
Certainly.
I'm sorry, I'm in a meeting right now. You have to call back.
Oh, you're busy.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, not at all. Not at all. So you'd want people to know that these tools are out there and that there are options. There are places in this country and also around the world that have used solidarity economics. There's a sort of a series of interlocking worker cooperatives in Cleveland, Evergreen, that exists and is, it has its pros and its cons, but it's a very good model for what can be done on a community development scale. There are individual worker co-ops that have a good history, like in California, Arizmendi. There's, of course, what you see in Mondragon in Spain, and then in Via Femina.
I've heard of that, yeah.
In Italy, Via Romano in Italy. There are good examples, and then, of course, there are the local examples, even, for community land trusts, Cooper Square. These are really good examples. Dudley in Massachusetts. But I think knowing that they exist and knowing that people can look at them and say, wow, all right, it doesn't solve everyone's problems, but they exist, what do we need to do? And so I think it's very important to make sure that the developers don't control getting all access to the land, putting it in trust so that at least that community has use of it and expanding the property that's available to them. Hopefully not just, I think, for housing, but maybe to incentivize local business. Maybe there'd be a way to ensure that the government, if we can do legislation that is suitable for this, tax holidays on local incubated worker cooperatives that the community has tried to develop based on, there's a lot to thinking about how you might want to create a little economy this way. But I guess the thing that I'm saying is there's some really good examples out there. I think anything that's cooperative and communal, while people don't really know about and they don't quite know how it would work, and you sure do have to work on people learning to work cooperatively and communally. That's not to be underestimated. We work in other structures with hierarchies, and people have to recognize that it takes some real work to do that, but it's very rewarding, and I think it has some really, really good options for people. And I would love to talk about it all day and all night. It also, to me, is expressing kind of a lived sense of human rights, to the extent that human rights aren't just what you have the Universal Declaration. They kind of, that's a proxy for what keeps going. You know, we know that we have needs, and our Constitution doesn't quite meet all of them, and we know there are economic and social needs, and that document talks a little bit about it, and there are solidarity, sort of broader needs, you know, in terms of dealing with the earth and dealing with broader issues. And really, human rights is just knowing that we have needs that we want to meet, that we've all committed our values to trying to figure out how to meet as we move forward, and that they're a little bit more expansive, I think, than our Constitution. And it's a good proxy what we have for the UDHR, but it's a place to start.
You know, you talk about the Constitution. I think the Constitution, I'll be honest about it, while I'm not all that crazy about some of the personal habits of many of the guys that wrote it, okay, I think that basically it's a pretty good document. I think the problem is that people need to understand. I think if I had some of those cats right in front of me, sitting right around the table, I think they would understand where I'm coming from when I say this. Because I say that the Constitution is a baseline.
Okay.
And that's what they would, I think they would agree with me. Because they would say, yo, this is what it was supposed to be. This was a baseline for you guys. Because, you know, they're overlooking their faults, right? They would say, hey, you know, we did a lot of things that, you know, you guys probably wouldn't like in your time, you know, but you got to remember, we're human beings, all right? We didn't know what was going to go down in the future. This is just it was a baseline, okay? This is something for you to expand on.
There you
The
go.
problem in America is that too many people, and that's one of the things I always hate about conservatives and certain Republicans, and that is that this is the Constitution.
Yeah.
This is that. The basics, you know, freedom, right? Okay, your freedoms and everything. Yeah, those, you know, that's cool, right? Yeah, those can be in stone. But the other things in terms of how you ensure that, right? Well, those have to be flexible because things change with time.
Absolutely.
We don't live in the world of 1789. It's a whole different bag now. I mean, you don't want to go back to slavery, okay? But by the same token, do you want to continue to dispose of property the same way you did in 1789? Of course not. Now, I say that, and the next thing I go to is, how do you get across to the American psychic? Because you got a lot of, hell, I'll go ahead and say it. Shit, it's my show. I don't give a damn what some people say. When you start throwing around words like communal, you know, and social, you know, and people start, you know, they start looking from side to side. They start getting terrified. Oh, socialists, you know. I think that's the hardest problem. And I don't know, how do you get it across to people that it's no threat to them. You know, it's no threat to look at what they're doing in Spain and say, hey, this is something that could work here. You know, well, you know that's Spain. This is America.
Yeah.
And I like to ask those guys, right? There's something wrong with something in your wife's spleen, right? But there's this doctor in Spain, okay, and he's had great success in fixing that. Now, would you turn that down? Would you tell your doctor, nah, don't read what that clown in Spain is doing, because he's Spanish and that's in Spain? No, because that doctor would have you committed, right? And see, you just gave me a good idea.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, that's how to approach these people.
Okay.
Yeah, that's how you got to approach it. But see, it's this. I hate to say American thing, but it's just a lot of blind stupidity. You know.
You know, I would pick up on what you said because it's a really good example. People have a lot of connotations with the language that they're used to. You know, we love our Constitution and we have very provincial notions about what our protections are. But the reality is, if you look on the street and if you look at even in all of our families, there are a lot of unmet needs.
Yeah.
There are a lot of, and it's the same thing at the individual level, at the family level, the community level. When people get together and say, what is it that I need and what do I need to live? People can say, well, God, you know, we sure do need housing. We sure would like to have enough food, and we'd like to be able to not be sick or see someone suffer. And so we know there's a lot of that everywhere. And so we know there are unmet needs. And we can talk about the Constitution, and I agree with you that people probably, I would imagine, didn't see this, even though we refer to the framers in this hallowed way, like this is what it was, and they love to keep it in amber. But it was an evolving document because our needs and our context evolve. They didn't have economic rights in the Constitution. That's one of the reasons why I like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, not because it's finished, but because they acknowledge you need an affirmative right to education, an affirmative right to housing, an affirmative right to health care, and collective bargaining with a meaningful wage. There are things in there that are articulated as needs that they put as rights because they think that there's supposed to be some kind of governmental guarantee that the state or whatever it is that we all agree upon as a social contract should be in the position with our collective resources to try to meet. And because, you know, we've got this whole narrative of individualism which we've used to fragment people, you know, on the hierarchy to make everyone feel shamed that they need things, and we all do. We absolutely do. There's not one person that can say that they've just done it on their own. And so for us to not have the ability, seriously, you know, to say, I've got to go and get some health care. Who amongst us, if your mom or if your wife or if your child is sitting there suffering, you know, and you can't afford to get the medication, or, I mean, you're going to do whatever the heck you can do. And if you can't live in a society where we're giving over our energy, which is really what work is under work and time, this is our energy that we collectively are putting out there. And we are doing it, you know, call it taxes, call it with all those connotations, call whatever it is, but whatever we think is our, in one form, in our material form, one collection of the energy that we put out, well then it should in some way try to serve meaningfully the needs that we have. And when you think about the gap in the accumulated energy by way of looking at money, when you think about people like Jeff Bezos or anyone, to think that that can even exist, when you can look on the street and see someone who is suffering, who doesn't have a place to stay, who doesn't have medication, that's where, you know, people forget that there's an opportunity for revolution. And the reason that there is, and it's not me suggesting it, but the social contract has always been we delegate our authority to somebody, you know, when we think about, you know, not the monarchs and things, so that they can care for and they can help us, you know, for the people. But just like with workers, you can withhold your labor, and you can also overturn that authority because they are not meeting your needs. And when you have someone that is hostile, someone that is hunting you down, or is trying to create the conditions where people do that to each other because they're corporatists or they're living in the Gilded Age, or they feel that there's some other narrative that they can put out for this kind of extraction. And that's really what it is, to take people's labor and their work and their life energy and not be able to give them a way to live and to be with each other. Because why are we on the planet? I mean, what are we doing here if we are not able to be with each other or to learn or to, I mean, I don't know. So forgive me, I just feel that you're right. Start with what is the document that we've agreed upon that we hope would meet needs coming from the feudal age. Back then that was the Constitution. We had King George, and now we know after the Industrial Revolution and what they did to people in terms of systematizing the extraction of labor and slavery, which was the chattelization of a being, and they gave that as an example to say we can do this, we can abuse power in this way. And then we did it with the prison and the convict lease system, and we're going to make sure that we make other people fearful so that you should not be them. And what we've continued to do with the way that they abuse power is you immigrants, those of us that we call immigrants, because every generation there's been a new group of immigrants that have then been assimilated so that they can feel like they're insulated by the power structure. We now have the so-called Mexican and the Southern people that we don't want as a kind of a way to say we will make you the anti-citizen, and if you other people don't, if you don't comply, you can see how power is used. We can lock them up, we can expel them. The examples of dehumanization and violence, it makes people fearful, it makes them docile, and it also, it's just a very broad example of how power maintains control.
That's why I'm running for Congress.
Wow, you're going to take care of all that? That's great.
Well, to tell you the truth, I honestly don't know. But I guess I've been that way ever since I was a kid. Somebody smacks me down and wants me to do something. I just gotta jump back up and say no.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel about what's happening to my country. What I see today. But what you say, we had a meeting at CASA a couple of nights ago, and I think I shook everybody up. I didn't mean to shake up my friends, but I just got sick of it. They had a couple of people there. Well, let me tell you, they had a couple of people from the city. What is it, HPD, housing, the usual suspects. And, they come basically trying to, chill everybody out. You got people there, right? Especially some people, they haven't had gas in their apartments and for 8-7 months, crap like that.
Yeah.
The whole, lead paint and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
The kids are walking around snacking off the walls like at Pringles, right? And these people, two Latino ladies, right? And they're on a microphone at this community center. And, they're talking blah, blah, blah. Well, all you have to do is get in touch and blah, blah, blah. And one of the young ladies in the audience jumps up, right? And she starts yelling, well, damn it, that's what we've been doing. And, if you send somebody over there, the landlord will chase them away. How the hell can you chase the person away? You guys represent a city agency. How can he get away with that? You guys don't do anything. And so I get up to speak. And so then one of our guys that's supposed to be chaperoning the meeting says, oh, okay, Bob. Well, it's just about, time was just about up. And that really ticked me off, but then later on I thought about it and I said, well, he might have had some justice on this side, because I did wait until the last person that finished, standing on the line to speak. But he says, you can catch them outside. They'll be sitting at the table outside, right, for people who still wanted to, speak to them. So I go outside, right, and in the hallway, and I say, look, I'm not trying to attack you ladies personally, but I'm just curious, how did they do it this time? At the office, did they, you guys draw lots to see who was going to come down here to take turns? To be, yelled at by these poor people here, or what? And I said, look, you know as well as I do, you are a couple of, no disrespect intended, but just like me, you are a couple of brown people who have city jobs. And you are here to basically take the weight, to act as a cushion. And I said, this is insanity. And I said, you know it, and I know it. Because I said, you have people, how do you expect people to live without being able to take a hot shower or a bath or without gas?
No.
I said, for God's sake, we are all human beings. Why are people expected to live like this? You know what people need. The people you work for know what is required for a human being. I'm sure between the two of you all, you have children, you have nieces and nephews. We all know what's necessary. Why should there be such a task to get this done? If this was a upscale neighborhood, this problem wouldn't exist.
That's right.
And I walked out, and that was it. So I guess to a point I am kind of a hothead. But I have a very low tolerance for BS, to be quite frank about it. I spent too much time in the Navy, I guess. But I do. And see, this is what angers me about the whole structure here. Now, don't get me wrong, because New York, at least you have the opportunity to voice some of these feelings. There are parts of this country, all right, where I would be in jail for voicing my feelings at a meeting like that. And see, this is what angers me. And this is what really worries me about this guy, Trump, okay?
Before you go to Mr. Trump.
Yeah, I was going to get there sooner or later.
Yeah, I guess I did. Let me just
go ahead,
join
yeah,
the
go ahead.
show on what you're saying, because, we're dealing with structures where we're all trying to live. Folks have their civil service jobs or their jobs, and it's not a lot, and you want to make sure you get your pension. And I'm sure it's hard for many to be in a structure that is not serving the people that really need the services of the agency. So, but it's a hard situation, and I can't make any comments except bad structure. On the other side of knowing what HPD does, there's another issue. I'm sure you've heard about it. And this is the active, and this goes across the country, and there are other people that speak more about this and more eloquently than I do, but same side, a different side of the same issue. And this is the theft of black land. And we talk about deed theft.
Oh, yes.
Deed theft here in this city, where they've been targeting black and brown communities, mostly in the areas of so-called gentrification, where there are two ways to do it. There could have been the fraud where certain groups will come in and say, hey, would you like a reverse mortgage? You can get equity in your house. And then they trick you to sign over your mortgage. But then there's the other one that's more insidious, and it goes through Local Law 37 under the way they characterize distressed property. And if you have a water bill over a certain amount of money, or it could be a lien on that property, and most of the time the criteria is not even met. It's supposed to be a certain higher level of money that would need to be owed, but then they can go through the city, through HPD, they'll do this third-party transfer program, and they will do an in rem foreclosure proceeding without the usual notice and due process provisions for this, and and it'll go right through, and they'll basically transfer that deed to a nonprofit that basically will either may use some of it for some of their activities, or it may end up going to developers mostly. And this, the city council should have oversight over this. City council members can look at people on those foreclosure lists and remove them. But the issue is broader than that. It's really insidious, and it's been in places like Brownsville, it's in Bed-Stuy, Crown Heights, in the Bronx. You look at the map, and it's mostly communities of color where they're taking these people, or else HDFCs, right? We're talking, it's either, you know, the co-op or it's the family home. And this has been going, and you'll see it, it's been in the paper, but HPD is lording over this, and that's why there needs to be a moratorium on that, and City Council needs to act on that, and there needs to be some kind of, either there's a lawsuit, but there also needs to be other kinds of activity, and there are people like Attorney Yolande Richardson and some other people, and even Bob Law, and people who are out there who are looking to make this issue very clear, because while they're making it uninhabitable for people to live in structures, this is part of it too. And then there's NYCHA trying to say, well, we can't have people stay there unless we take the land that makes your property even habitable, like the parkland, and we're going to give that to private developers so they can crowd out the folks there. They're looking at a lot of brown folks that they have decided this city is no longer for, you know, lower income people that they've decided black and brown are expendable. So you're going to push them out. We see them going to Georgia. We see more people going to different places. There's been a reverse migration in some ways, and this is not an accident.
Well, let me ask you something. Before the show started, I was basically giving you a little background about myself. You know, my great adventure started, you know, when I was 17. Went in the military the first time. Came back, went to college, then went down to my mom's home in Virginia for a couple of years. Came back, then I decided to go in the Navy. Yeah, came back, and make a long story short, I come back and I like Rumpelstiltskin, and I'm like, what the hell happened to Harlem? You know, no, didn't expect everything to remain the same. But I came back, I left a vibrant, fighting community, right? I came back to, I don't know, the people seem like whipped dogs to a large extent. Not all of them. I know you weren't like that. But generally, almost like whipped, and a lot of them were just gone. The whole property shape, the shape of the property was even different.
Yeah.
The politicians didn't seem like real politicians. They seemed like clay dolls, like clay puppets almost. I know it's a very strange way to describe it, but in my way of thinking, that's just how they seemed. What the hell happened? Because you were here all that time.
Don't look to me and explain it. I can only say one thing, because I see it in bits and pieces, but I can only imagine how stark it must have been for you to come back up here and see that over that period of time. I don't know exactly what happened, but I can say we know what happened, and that was there was this period where we knew parts of Manhattan were ripe for development. I would say that after we know Giuliani came in here, and what Giuliani did.
I understand it started with him. That's what I heard.
In terms of using enforcement to push out people, you know, what became the stop and frisk policies and what became the community sweeps were about, in some ways, starting. I mean, you're moving a lot of people into the prisons, and then they're making it safe for property development. And you probably remember, you know, when they were doing the development around 110th Street, that border of Harlem, and there was that group of community African drummers that had been there forever.
Yeah.
And, you know, and then basically there was a new co-op or condo, something that was built along the park side on 110th Street, and they started to complain because they found it was disruptive, you know, the sound, it was too early, whatever. These were drummers that had been in that park for 15 years and more. And actually the police, there was some agreement to move them further into the park. And so actions like that, where the neighborhood was made more comfortable for the gentrifying element, the police were being used to kind of move people out. Then there was, of course, just, the influx of money and the way that places like HPD work, where they're taking over, in increasing rates, what would have either been city-owned property or people who, they're using foreclosure, pushing people out. They really went for it. And then Columbia, of course, unfortunately, just like NYU did downtown, with their development in the upper part of Manhattan, they took over a lot of land. They gave some money, but they just took it over.
No disrespect. I'm laughing. The reason I'm laughing is because my old man, I know he's doing somersaults in his grave.
Oh.
Yeah. Remember the big riots and takeovers of the 60s?
Sure.
He was one of the guys that led that.
In New York or where?
Right there. Remember Morningside Park?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that was him.
Wow.
That was him. And what he, the baseball fields there from 110th on Morningside Avenue?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. He was the one that forced Columbia to give that to the community. Now, we're talking 64, 65,
Wow.
66,
Wow.
67.
Hats off to your dad.
That's right. And if you go up to their athletic department, you're going to see a big, huge picture, and he'll be at the corner,
Wow.
and you'll see this handsome young child in a baseball uniform in the middle, around a bunch of black and Puerto Rican kids, and that would be me.
Wow.
Yeah, because he forced him to give that to the community. And he had 5 teams down there. Yeah. Grand Stars, the Blazers. Oh, God. What was we? I was in the All-Stars.
Mm.
Yeah. I was heading for the major leagues at one time. I had a football team, a basketball team. Oh, it had the works. But then him and my mom, they made the mistake a lot of our folks did. They left in the mid-'70s at the time of the so-called bankruptcy. And they went down, him and her went down to her, where she was from in Virginia. And I don't know, I guess they went to their little plotting stage. And so they finally, and then, Adam Clayton Powell, he passed on. And I don't know where, Charlie Rangel. Yeah, exactly. And there was an expression, cheesecake MF, black politician, in Harlem in the Bronx.
Wow.
And they basically sold us out. Now you're talking about the property and how that was taken away from the community, people in the community. Charlie Rangel was responsible for a lot of that.
I believe it.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I saw him a couple of times going to some of these places, cutting the ribbon for these places. And I'm saying, wait a minute, you're supposed to be my congressman. Why are you cutting the ribbon for places that we can't afford to move in? Okay, so what do we do?
Oh, please. What do we do? You're going to solve it.
Well, I think what we need to do, and I know some people, they hate talking about politics, but in this country, in the present frame of way things are now, this is the only way that you can get things done. And what we have to do, we have to start electing reliable people, especially in Manhattan, in the Bronx, and in Brooklyn.
Absolutely.
And if we don't,
Absolutely.
we're finished.
Well, I would give you a model. I'm a big admirer of the Assemblymember Charles Barron and Inez Barron.
Oh, the Barrons. Yeah.
And what they do in East New York is really a model in terms of keeping out the kind of gentrification that has started to try to move in through the city planning process, the so-called planning with the community.
Yeah.
And needing to be clear that least understanding the power that comes with each position, that the council member can actually say, look, we're not going to allow for this kind of development. We have approval power on some of these things. And the one thing I can say, and it's tremendous, is that the AMI in that area, which I think is something like $37,000, their new affordable housing meets that AMI, not the kind of affordability that when people talk about, well, who's it affordable for? And so I agree with you. You need to get people and communities that have a consciousness about what it is, not just through the elected official, even though you want that elected official, but to understand why are they working and moving that way. We need the control to self-determine our area. That's what the elected officials are intended to do. But then how do we self-determine and organize our resources? What are our values? That to me was the corollary when we start talking about how do we, one, if it's in our community, we not reproduce the kind of hierarchical capitalist, an internalized white supremacist, whatever it is, we need to have the value set to let us understand, look, we want to be kind to each other and we need what people need to live. So that's kind of human rightsy. Let's just put it out there. What do people need? We need people who can protect us in terms of having those value sets in mind for the community. That's why the people who are elected can do that and more. And then there's the economic self-development at the lowest level, where everyone can participate and find ways to also train and maybe incubate things that they know that they need for the community. Say you know that you don't have enough people to deal with the trauma of what went on with people coming back from incarceration. Maybe you know that there's some social work trained, formerly incarcerated people. Maybe they want to form a worker co-op. Shouldn't they be given the opportunity to have seed money and be able to work, to have a space in a low rent, no rent place that is about community supporting that worker co-op and that they offer offsets to the community for their work and that the community supports it? Aren't there things that we need, like healthy, we want to have access to healthy food, that we decide that we want those kinds of things in our community and we support them and we give them offsets and tax.
Why is the price of food, forgive me, I do this sometimes.
Okay,
I just start
go with it.
shooting out
I'm just
questions.
going like this. So.
Okay, no, that's fine. That's fine. Very impressive, also, by the way.
No,
But
okay.
let me ask you, why is the price of food in the lower income communities in North Manhattan and the Bronx more and more expensive? I shop there, so
I don't
I'd
know.
like to know why.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, I do not know why, if you're being serviced by these chains, are you dealing with associateds? I mean, who are the
What, like Key
key
Foods,
food?
Associated, mainly, yeah, Key Food, Associated, and that's about it. Key Food, Associated. There might be one more, but that's it.
I don't know the pricing and I don't understand that, but I can point you to an interesting model that may be helping deal with this on a movement level. There's a man named Mark Winston Griffith, and he, among many things, works with the Brooklyn Movement Center, and they're building out a community cooperative. It's like food cooperative and also more, and he's been really central to making that happen, to control the community, to help control the movement of the community gardens, so that some of that could be about locally grown food and making sure it's accessible. There's a whole economic model of that I don't fully grasp, but I know that he's doing that kind of work. He would be someone to talk to. He's really a tremendously impressive guy.
Okay. Socialism. What do you think?
Oh, I think you know the answer to that.
No, but express yourself.
Okay. There's a lot of different gradations of socialism, and I am very much in favor of anything that supports people and offering resources in the broadest and most horizontal way. I'm not trying to say to anyone that there shouldn't be. In fact, I'm not even going to address the narratives against it. I just tend to. Yeah,
Democratic socialism.
I think it's a good model. I like worker cooperatives, but I think all of those things can interrelate because you have existing institutions. And so we want to maximize the use of those institutions for the people. Why should we have a healthcare system that isn't able to provide healthcare to everyone? Why should we have education where people can get it for free? You know, why should we have to have debt like this? If we have existing institutions, you know, as we transform to something maybe else, let's make those institutions work for people, you know, not the corporations, not for people accumulating a tremendous amount of money or extracting all of our labor. I'm for democratic processes. I'm for anti-racist, anti-hierarchical processes where we can value everyone in that way. That's hard to do. We have to socialize. We have to acculturate people.
If I say capitalism, what do you think?
I'm not a big fan of it because I feel it's a hierarchical structure that privileges those who have the means to extract wealth. We are in a capitalist structure. There's some good parts that people are using, but I'm not in favor of it. I think of it much like patriarchy. You know, it's a system that basically privileges a certain person or entity at the top, and it's a hierarchy.
Can you mix it?
I'm sure there are people that can. I'm not an economist. I know people like Rick Wolff and people like David Harvey can speak about it, and I think they're transitions that make sense. I think you need institutions. In the same way, here's my rejoinder to this. I'm an anti-punishment person. I don't believe really in prisons. I think there are other ways to deal with that issue. But everyone says, well, you want them on the street? And I said, well, wait a minute. Not everyone is. We all have things that we need. You know, some of us need to be in mental health. Some of us need some counseling. So, you know, do you think putting someone in sensory deprivation and locking them up is a good thing? But that doesn't mean the alternative is there's nothing. You know, we have to be responsive and intentional about how we create those institutions to meet those needs. So philosophically, I'm going to say we should think about how we can help people grow and educate and move into the things that they need, and target and work very hard on helping people that are dealing with some of those other issues. I don't think a prison is the way. However, and I feel that way about capitalism. But dismantling something in a revolutionary sense often also means people have bloodshed, sometimes that needs to happen, but I would say we can move, I hope, unless the backlash is such from corporations, and we know it is, where it becomes that kind of thing, where people say, look, you know, I'm used to having this kind of privilege and money, and there's no transition away from that. But I do believe, sure, use existing institutions and acculturate the kids, help them learn why this would be useful.
If a man commits murder, what should we do with him?
Okay. There are lots of good examples. First of all, I don't believe that a state should really be in the position to do that to another being. I think there is an issue where other people in the families need to know that they don't take matters into their own hand because the state isn't handling it, because they're very upset about somebody, my mother, somebody's wife, someone's husband. You know, I would be distraught, obviously, if somebody hurts someone in my family. So what do I do with them? I think there are examples in Norway and Sweden where that's one end of the spectrum. They say that the sentencing is 22 years and they get all kinds of social and psychological things. They're very based upon the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and their social welfare structure. They have different kinds of supports in the society as it is. They don't have an issue about education being free. They don't have an issue about healthcare being free. Those things are already there. So I think that's an interesting thing. I mean, one guy committed murder and 86 people were mass murdered, and they're going to baseline their 22 years in prison and see where he is at that point. I don't think you want retribution to be the guide for what you do with a person. At the same time, you have to evaluate, what do I do with this person if they're still professing a desire, or you can interpret the notion that these are people that have an issue with destruction. They, as you might say out of Star Wars, they like the dark side. And then what do? That's a question for education. That's a question for maybe there's a lot of thought that needs to go there. I don't know. But generally, I don't think most people who have done that, and many young people, and sometimes you'll see the recidivism rates for people who've committed violent crime, especially murder, is very low, especially as they're older. So it's not that it looks like it's to be replicated. It may have been at some point during their life issues and circumstances.
Yeah, that's something that I think about a lot. See, originally I had two sons, and the first son was the victim.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, and I've often wondered what I would do if I ever had the opportunity to confront I believe it was a young man. I had nothing to do with it because nothing I could have done to prevent that. Remember I told you when I was speaking about my first marriage. Yeah, well, that was a victim of the Navy, my first tour in the Navy. She didn't like it, and so I got the pink slip.
Oh.
And that happens. But he was down there. But it does have to do with what we're talking about, because that was in the early 80s. And if you remember, all the cities were just, well, I don't know. Were they? Was Black America, were all of our cities, or wherever we had a large black population, were we all just combat zones with the crack? Remember what they were saying?
Oh,
The crack epidemic. They're killing each other.
Yeah,
and,
black on black.
What is black and black crime, by the way?
I don't even like using that language.
I don't either.
I really hate it.
So what do you call World War One?
Yeah, exactly.
What do you call World War Two?
More white genocide.
Yeah.
It's all language, right?
Yeah. It's weird.
I really appreciate your openness and your thoughtfulness about what happened with your son, and I am very sorry. It's a very different thing to talk to someone who's suffered. Fortunately for me, I've not had that kind of encounter with in personal experience someone who's ripped up my family like that. And it sounds like you're an open person to consider and think about, what is it?
It was very hard. It took me years to talk about it.
Do you ever get over it? Yeah.
No, you don't get over it. You just learn to live with it.
But the thing just to talk about the language you were using, so-called black on black crime, or all of it, the way in which, you remember the Bosnian War and that whole thing where whenever anyone wants to distance themselves from involving themselves in a way that's meaningful, they create this notion that it's innate to that group, or it's always happened since time immemorial. The Serbs and the people in the mountains have been killing each other, or the Africans and those tribes have been, like, it's natural for them. They're all starving over there. I mean, that's what they do, and it's, and that is that notion that we would be disrupting, or why would we get involved? That's what they do. It would be futile to be involved. Black on black crime. To even get into the way in which those conditions were created is so outrageous. All of it has affirmatively been created, and you have to spend tons of, not that much time, but what Ta-Nehisi Coates wrote about in The Case for Reparations, or just when you think about how we, as we were progressing and shunted into areas and segregation and redlining and all the different ways in which people were cut off from resources and then policed and then urban renewal and all of these things, and then enforcement post-civil rights and bringing in the drugs and COINTELPRO and the way you criminalize people, and then
it's a good movie. It still comes on every so often. Gangs of New York.
I've never seen that movie. Is it good?
Yeah, you should watch it.
All right. I'm actually.
It has my boy, the one who did what's his name, Django, with the brother.
Oh, you did Jamie Foxx?
No, not Jamie Foxx, but the guy who played the white plantation owner.
Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Okay.
Because it tells about how the Irish are looked upon. when they came over, okay? Right like at the beginning of the Civil War. Actually, that's about 1862, 63, when it climaxes, right? And it shows how they got in, gangs, right? And how desperate the times were for them. And how the Protestant, white American Protestants talked about them, you know? Just like the guy said, you have to remember, the Irish were the niggers of the British Empire. And see, when people talk all this stuff about, yeah, well, black on black crime, right? When I'm in one of those, around anywhere near one of those conversations, I always have to remind people. I used to hear some of those conversations when I was at, of all places, the Pentagon. I had some idiotic young Air Force captain, and he was trying to, who was he talking about? I think he was talking about was it the Asians? I think it was either the Asians or Middle Easterners or someone, right? I think it might have been Russians, Eastern Europeans. And, well, actually, they are the, and he was talking to a white gal. She was a government secretary in the office that I also happened to be in at the time. And he said, yes, well, they're the model immigrant group, like that. And then, I could feel their eyes shifting at me, right? And that he went over and started doing something, right? So I guess it was just me being the devil, And I started up a conversation with somebody else in the office, right? It was a good-sized office. And I was talking about school. And the guy asked me, Army guy asked me, hey, Bob, you went to Catholic school? I said, yeah. I said, most of my education was in Catholic school. I went to public school my first 3 years, and then when I hit the 4th grade, I was in Catholic school until my junior year in high school. And then I dropped out and I went in the Army. So you went to Catholic school all them years? I said, yeah. And he said, who'd you have? And I said, well, I had the Irish Christian Brothers. And they used to tell me all their gang stories. And he said, gang stories? I said, yeah, all those Irishes in Harlem, and how they used to kill each other. It's good stuff, right? And the Air Force captain and the secretary he was talking to, they turned around, their head was like on a swivel. And I said that just to remind folks that all immigrant groups,
absolutely,
they had their problems. You had a guy that my dad knew, right? And I could see, apparently your parents were kind of like mine, very activist. A guy named Paul O'Dwyer, right? Most of the folks out in the audience, they might be too young to remember him. But I think he had been a mayor, police commissioner, one of your regular old-time New York City political types, right? But he was a real cool guy. And the thing that I liked about him, when people would try to get their, how they used to say, have their ass on their shoulders and look down their nose at the blacks and Puerto Ricans, he would remind folks, especially his Irish counterparts, right? Say, hey, remember how they used to talk about us in the old days?
That's right.
The Irish were scum. Oh, God. They used to hang Italians in Louisiana, in New Orleans, right?
Absolutely.
Just lynch them, right? But see, this is what ticks me off about black leadership, all right? We have very few that really know how to stand up and make people back off, see? Like this guy Trump, right? And yeah, it comes back to, I come back to Trump a lot because he's very involved in a lot of what we're trying to do. Because in his mind, all the beautiful things that you're talking about, that's not necessary in his mind. We're just a bunch of lazy slobs as far as he's concerned. And no federal funds to be allocated. That was the last question I wanted to ask you, by the way. One of the things, as I try to run, as I run for Congress, I believe that it's time for the federal government to get back into the housing business.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
You asking my
100%.
question.
No. I mean, they've been starving it. There's no more facilities, anything for upkeep, nothing for HUD, no vouchers, no Section 8, I mean, yeah, completely. They've been starving the beast, as they like to say.
Okay.
And this is what they've also at the state level been doing to transit, too, as far as subways. Let me just add, thank you so much for what you were saying. There is no question when they talk about the so-called narratives out there of dehumanization, and it's always come from what they like to say as authority. Science will give it to you, theology will give it to you, literature will give it to you, law will give it to you in terms of how do you dehumanize people that have yet to be brought into the center politically. We know that a guy named Blumenbach created out of the 5 different racial types, Caucasian is one of them, and then how did you know this? He just came up with it.
Yeah.
Linnaeus and then all the different scientists that came up and gave us these different authoritative
What was it,
ways.
1880s, 1890s, right?
No, that was earlier. It was around 1670s or early 1700s. And these were all part of the Enlightenment ways in which they thought that science was going to classify. And then you got to, when we got all the way down through there, we got to Darwinism, and then people used Darwinism and then social Darwinism and eugenics to kind of create a guideline. But as you say, every new group, including white was not just the category for everyone who knows what white is? It's a political term. It's also what the census decides is changing all the time. So it's like the Irish, when the Irish became white, is an interesting book. They came in and they started to assimilate, and then the same with the Italians, and the same with certain Latino groups, and I think the Cubans would like to, every group would like to invoke whiteness, and some are accepted based on
that's what I forgot to bring up.
What?
The whole thing here, especially in New York, right? We have to fight like hell because I see it. People try to let it seep in. We are all one in this struggle, all right? I think a lot of my Latino brothers and sisters are starting to learn this. And I have to remind folks that my old man is Dominican, half Dominican, okay? That's where he was raised. Born in St. Thomas. His dad was from D.R. His mom was Haitian. So he had a lot of problems.
Oh, boy.
Later for him, I got a lot of problems. I'm a what, 3-way, 4-way, whatever. But they were always trying for the longest. And Giuliani was famous for this in the beginning, trying to parse the American black as being different from the Latino.
Caribbean too.
And from the Caribbean and from the African.
Make them all.
Yeah. So that's a reminder. We are all in the same pot, okay? And we all came off that same slave boat.
That's our diaspora.
That's the diaspora. So we all take a part. Whether your master spoke Spanish or French or Dutch or English. That's history.
Yeah.
Listen, I have to tell those people that you will come back.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I'm going to tell you something. I know what they're saying now, right? They are saying this is the first time, you are the first guest that I've had that has been able to, she's the first person to make him keep his big mouth shut.
Oh, cut it out.
I'm serious.
No, because I ran it more.
No, this is true. This is true. You're an awesome guest.
Thank you very much.
And I do look forward to having you come back.
I'd be delighted. Thank you for
Okay.
the conversation.
Thanks, pal.
You bet.
Okay. Let me go ahead and turn this off. And what I'm going to do, as a matter of fact, to make sure we get this done, when you leave, I'm going to go ahead and start working on this tape. I'm going to stay here and do it.
Well, that was a fun conversation. I mean,